Today I'm going to be planting what I consider to be one of the most important foods you could possibly grow, the sweet potato. Hey everybody, Chad Cruiser here with Health and Homestead. I'm not going to be growing kind of the standard sweet potato that you might normally buy around Thanksgiving. I am going to grow one of my very favorite foods in the world, and that is a Japanese sweet potato called the murasaki. And there's different ones from Japan, well, at least from Okinawa. You have the ones with the outer white covering, and then you have the inner purple. This one is purplish on the outside, especially when they're fresher, and on the inside it's more of a whitish color, off-white. These are unbelievably tasty. They're drier. These are so much wetter when you eat them, but the flavor from these ones, these murasaki, these Japanese ones, are unbelievable. I can literally eat them every day, and talking about eating them every day, not the murasaki, but another form of sweet potato was eaten by the Okinawans. And you say, okay, what does that mean? Well, the Okinawans historically were one of the longest living cultures on planet Earth. And they would eat about 69% of their diet was sweet potato. 69% of their diet. That's unbelievable, an unbelievable amount of carbs in their diet. Actually, when you look at the breakdown of the macronutrients of the Okinawans, this is actually a chart, this is looking at the actual science. Looking back to 1949, around 1950, the average Okinawan that grew to be one of the longest living cultures on planet Earth, notice what percentage of their diet was carbohydrates. Historically, 85% of their diet was carbohydrates. And someone has got to be thinking, what? 85% of their diet was carbohydrates? That means only 15% of their diet was not carbs. And they became one of the longest living groups of people. And today they're not. They actually changed. They eat a lot more fat today. They eat a lot more, actually, really junk food. It's not the fat per se, because really it's not just the macronutrient scores that make someone healthy or not. It's really what quantity of their diet typically has to do with plant foods. And almost the entire diet of the Okinawans, they ate around 97% of their diet was plant foods. Roughly 3% of their diet was animal products. And so they ate very little animal products, but they ate 85% of their diet. Now, notice what percentage was fat. And 6% of their diet was fat. I'm guessing they were one of the cultures on planet Earth that ate the least amount of fat of any other culture, and yet they were one of the top 2 longest living cultures on planet Earth. It's quite fascinating. They were one of what are called the blue zones. Dan Buettner went around the world looking at these various cultures. You read about it in National Geographic. He wrote a book on this particular subject. Now, speaking about these sweet potatoes, now, this was one of the main things in their diet. Nearly 70% of their diet on a daily basis was the sweet potato, meaning they were eating, this was their staple. Just like people in the West, grains, specifically wheat, has become the staple diet of the people in the West. Actually, another one of the cultures of longevity, they ate nearly 50% of their diet, actually they still do, they ate nearly 50% of their diet from grains, and yet they're one of the longest living groups of people in the world today. So grains are not one of the things that are killing people. That's just simply not true. When you look around the world, now refined grains are junk food generally, but that's not what we're talking about. Back to the sweet potato. So what happened? What are they eating like now? Now, the Okinawans, I'm sad to say, they are no longer one of the longest living groups of people in the world. Look at their macronutrient intake today. It has changed. It went from 85% of their diet was carbohydrate down to 58%. Their protein intake went from 9, it went up to 15%, and their fat calories went up to 27%. Actually, they are now the fattest group of people in Japan. So they went from the longest living, the healthiest people in Japan within basically a generation or two to becoming the fattest group of people in Japan, and now they're just simply not healthy. What changed? Well, basically the Western type diet with junk food and these kind of things moved over there. You got KFC and these kind of things, moved over to Japan, and now they're simply not healthy. But when they were eating nearly 70% of their diet as sweet potato, they're one of the longest living groups of people in the world. And sweet potatoes have about 1.5% fat. They're just very low fat. Now, it's not that they're healthy because they're low fat. They just happen to be unbelievably healthy, and they're slower at giving off their carbohydrates to the body, and they were thin, trim, and healthy. Actually, people who eat the most carbohydrates are actually generally the thinnest people. Look at the fruitarians. Look up fruitarians. They're unbelievably skinny, and they eat generally around 80% of their diet is carbs. So carbs don't make people fat, that idea. Now, refined carbs can, if you're just eating refined junk food all the time, but generally refined junk food has a lot of sugar and a lot of fat. Those two things together make people overweight. It's just simply true. They're junk foods when they're eaten like that as refined junk foods. You get the idea. But back to our sweet potatoes. So we're going to be planting these today, and I actually live up in the north. I live in a zone 5. So not like a ridiculously cold area, but it probably could get down to -20, something like that in the winter from time to time. It generally doesn't, but it potentially could. You could have those cold snaps, and the coldest it's ever been in this area, I think, is like -33, and we're talking here Fahrenheit specifically. We're not talking Celsius, so look it up, -33 Fahrenheit, whatever that is in Celsius. They meet together at -40. -40 Celsius is -40 Fahrenheit, but we're getting way off subject here. So it can get cold, but I'm not worried about the winter. It's that I don't have super long summers, and sweet potatoes love heat, especially the general sweet potato. There are certain ones that do decently well. General sweet potatoes, like the Georgia Jet, has been known to grow somewhat well in the north. The Beauregard can do quite well in the north, but it's said that this is one of the best varieties right here, the Murasaki, the Japanese variety, that these are one of the best varieties to grow in the north. You generally only need around 95 days to grow it. Some of the other varieties, like the original Okinawan variety, they need between 120 to 160 days. Now, I very seldom am going to get 160 days. It would just be a fluke year where we had the last frost was quite early and the first frost in the fall was quite late. So I'm not likely to ever have that. And even the time between, for a good amount of time, it's going to be quite cold. And sweet potatoes love the heat. So you want to make sure that you're probably getting your nighttime temperatures really shouldn't be dropping anywhere below 50 degrees when you're planting your sweet potatoes. I mean, even higher is better. They just simply love the heat. And so I'm basically at that point. Actually, today was super hot for here. It was like 86, my car said 87 degrees. This is not normal for May. This is not what we typically have in May. So it was, you know, it's cooled down a little bit now, which I'm doing it just before nighttime. And this is actually going to be a good time to start the slips that we have. I bought my slips from Southern Exposure Seeds. I think that's the name of the company. Google it, you'll see it. And they still have some of the slips available right now, still at the end, you know, toward the end of May. So if you want to try it out, hurry up and get on there, because they are going to be gone, I'm sure. You actually have to look up Japanese, like red Japanese sweet potato, I think they call it. They don't call it Murasaki. I think they call it red Japanese or Japanese sweet potato. And you can still get some of the slips. And I'm going to be planting 100, and I'm hoping to get plenty that I can save them through next winter, and then I can actually be starting my own slips next year, because that's one of the great things about buying either seeds or slips in these kinds of things. In a garden, you typically, if you do a good job and you know what you're doing, you only need to buy them once. That's an amazing thing to think about, that you can literally buy something one time. You can either buy seeds, you can buy these starts, or you can buy something like these slips, and if you save them and all goes well, you can have them for the rest of your life. What else can you do in life that works like that? I mean, that's just an amazing thought. So that's my goal, is to plant them and save them. That's what I'm going to be doing this winter. Now, if you didn't see my last video actually shows me going through the work of actually preparing the soil, doing the simple amendments. I'm not taking in anything from outside of this property. I'm only using things that I can source from my own property. Not that I never do for anything, but as much as possible, that's my goal, to have a property that kind of works on itself. Now, if you have some serious nutrient deficiencies, there totally are times that, you know, let's say you're low on boron boron or something like that, you're gonna have to get that. You're gonna have to get yourself some 20 mule team borax or whatever it is. But in general, if you can get to the point where your soil is working and you're just using your compost or your biochar or various different things like manure that you have from your own animals, whatever it is, using these things can be as self-sufficient as possible. And that's what I seek to do. Now, it takes time to work your way up to all these things. Yes, it does. But there's just something about working with what you've gotten. So let's get started. So here's my slips. You might be thinking, oh, that's terrible. What on earth are you doing? Well, I ordered them online, and they actually warned you when when they sent the, they let us know, hey, they're being shipped. They said, listen, they may be wilted, they may be rough, but they will grow. Don't worry about it. Just simply plant them. Maybe add some water to the bag if you can't get them planted right away. So I actually just got them, well, they came yesterday, but they were in another city, so I had to go drive and get them. I have them now, and this is what they look like. So how do we plant them? Well, first of all, obviously you've got to take them out of the package. So once you have them out, you're going to have to one by one separate them. All right, so let's get to planting. One of the things you want to do is you want to know your spacing, and each particular plant will have its own spacing. In this particular situation, somewhere between 10 to 14 inches. Some varieties of sweet potatoes might do better at even 18 inches apart. I'm gonna do 12 inches apart, and I actually have my trusty little stake here, which happens to be dead on 12 inches. So that helps me to actually have accurate spacing. I already have my lines lined up here, so I'm not worried about the lines, I'm not the rows, and my rows are going to be 3 feet apart. So 3 feet on the rows, 12 inches from plant to plant, and you want to be planting them probably 4 inches or so down into the hole. So at this point, you just keep going along, and it can be a relatively fast process. I mean, obviously, if you had a massive field, this would be a very slow process unless you had some kind of machinery. But I literally could eat these every day, and if I had enough of the Japanese sweet potatoes, I actually probably would. The only thing is, they're relatively expensive, at least where I live, and so I like to get a diversity of food anyway, so I split up whether it's the Japanese variety or from time to time we'll get the purple ones, and then we also just get the standard ones like everybody gets around. Everybody, I guess that's kind of relative. Most people don't eat sweet potatoes much, but they're so amazingly good for you. They're a food that will give you tons of energy, and not only that, they are probably one of the absolute best weight loss foods you could possibly eat. And why do I say that? It's because they are low in caloric density, they don't have a lot of calories, and they have a bunch of nutrition. That's phenomenal, but they also they produce a lot of satiety, meaning you get full relatively quick on sweet potatoes. And so that's why if you do it, if you actually eat them, what happens is you get to the point where you're full and you just didn't simply end up eating that many calories. So they are really just one of the best foods that you could possibly eat, and they're so tasty. So they're just kind of like a win-win all around when it comes to nutrition. And if you can grow them yourself, you're going to save yourself a lot of money. Another thing about sweet potatoes is that they also can store quite well, depending on what variety you have. I have a very close friend of mine, you may have seen the video I did on the Amish plowing. A friend of mine, Andy Weaver, he grew up Amish and still lives much of his life the Amish lifestyle, although not 100% at this point, but nevertheless, he and his family, they find that their sweet potatoes actually store better than their standard white potatoes. So if that works out for you, you'll be in really good shape. So you can have all year long, you could be eating your sweet potatoes along with various other foods. But to me, having this as a staple is just a great way to go. So this is how you have it. One of the reasons why you need 3-foot rows is because these things are simply going to spread. They spread like crazy. And someone who's in very cold weather, you still want to do it. One of the things that you can actually do is you can put down black plastic, and that will heat up the soil. It also helps the sweet potatoes to stay in one particular area, because as they send out their branches, their vines, they start going everywhere, and they're going to start shooting down, and they're going to try to maybe even grow some little sweet potatoes there, but you really want them to be focused in the center. One of the things you can do is you can actually eat. You don't want to do too much of it, but you can actually eat the leaves. The leaves of sweet potatoes are edible, so you can be eating those along the way, cutting off some here and there, and you'll still be able to have a good pull of sweet potatoes at the end of the year. Another option for you, if you can't get a hold of them, you can actually go to something like Whole Foods. I know it's also called Whole Paycheck. It's very expensive, but you can go buy some organic Japanese sweet potatoes, and you can actually put them in water, you can put them in soil, either way, and you'll end up getting your slips yourself. So there's always a way to do it. Even if you can't do it, even if you can't buy it, you could actually grow your own. So those are the options. If you like this video, hit the thumbs up button. All the best, God bless, and have a fantastic day.